It's April 1653, and a chilly spring day in the Hudson Valley of New York, or as it was known then, New Netherland. The trees are just beginning to bud as the residents of a small Dutch trading colony trudge down the muddy road built just 1 year prior at the inception of their town. Among them is a young man named Willem Hoffmeyer, and he's as new to this continent as the town is. There's an air of excitement shared among the simple folk walking together. The local magistrate has called an extra court session to decide the fate of their neighbors who have been quarreling with each other for over a year. Today, it all comes to a head as one neighbor is put on trial to pay for his crimes. For Willem, the court session is personal. The man on trial is his stepfather, Joachim. And honestly, I looked up how to pronounce this name, and I think I'm getting it right.
Is it spelled wild?
Joch. Sometimes I-N, sometimes E-N. He's an impetuous, blustering bull of a man that Willem's mother recently married.
Oh, with a name like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in Willem's mind, the jury is definitely still out on his opinion of this man. Get it? His court. So the residents file into the rustic wooden building being utilized for court that day, and they see a handful of important men at the front of the room. These are the magistrates, and they are ready to decide the fate of the middle-aged man standing at the center, Joachim himself. He already looks annoyed, and Willem knows this is not a good sign. The magistrate stands up, and he reads the offenses against Joachim. The list is damning. Verbal harassment of his neighbor, outstanding debts, and most damning of all, the pig pen that he constructed in front of his neighbor's door that he was ordered to dismantle and refused.
This is like Taylor Dozy crimes.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's like small town New York.
This is petite crimes, once again.
It's petite crimes.
Yeah.
So Joachim listens to these crimes one by one, each one causing his angry frown to deepen further. And at the end of it all, the honorable magistrate declares his sentence. The defendant will pay 50 guilders, which is a Dutch currency that is equal close to about 4,000 US dollars today.
Whoa!
And he has to promise to dismantle the pig pen. Joachim is incensed. He grumbles angrily to himself, but he does leave the building without a fuss, and Willem is relieved to see that his stepfather doesn't choose to do anything worse. Well, relieved and slightly shocked. Taking it peacefully on the chin is pretty out of character for Joachim.
Don't trust.
But Willem doesn't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, so he lets out a sigh of relief and watches the court continue on. Court moves on to other important business of the town, debts owed, complaints of the beaver trade, and so on. Town is disappointed that the show for the day has already ended. Joachim is usually good for a show, but they don't remain disappointed for long.
He's coming back.
Suddenly, the door of the building bursts open to reveal a furious Joachim brandishing his sharpened sword at the court magistrate. He points it at Magistrate Jans, calling him every foul name he can think of, and then dares him to step outside and face him like a man. Willem's unfounded relief leaves him as quickly as it had come as the excitement of the day races back through the crowd. This was the Joachim they had come to see. I'm Karen Harding, an amateur genealogist, and I've spent an embarrassing amount of time and money unlocking the stories of the people who had to exist for me to exist.
And I'm Kim McMasters, a millennial with no interest in history, having kids, or leaving a legacy of my own.
And you're listening to Low Ancestry. Each episode, I'll share one story from my family tree with Kim, proving that ordinary people like me, with ordinary ancestry like mine, have compelling and sometimes scandalous or heartbreaking stories buried within them, because people have been messy for time immemorial. Welcome, Kim.
Welcome, Karen.
Welcome back. I'm glad you didn't run away from last time.
I'm not sure I had a choice.
Yeah, I am keeping you captive here.
Part of the deal.
But we actually have a pretty fun one today.
I'm very excited already.
It's a little bit more low stakes.
And a little bit more Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah, I think so. And it's just all messy family shenanigans.
Yeah.
So this time we're jumping pretty far back in time, about as far back as one can go in American ancestry for those of us who are of Western European descent. So today's story is a story of European colonialism on the global stage. It's a story about what happens when people leave everything they know to live in a place deeply unfamiliar to them. And it's about how none of us are disconnected from the ripple effects of history, no matter how far removed we think we are. Kim.
Hey, hey, we'll get to me.
We'll get to you
I'm
soon.
not worried about me. We'll get to me.
But before we jump into the fun part,
Yes.
there are 3 things I would love to acknowledge up at the top before we dive in. So if I may, Kim.
Please.
Number 1, story is colonization heavy. And although I will definitely touch on it throughout the episode, I think it's worth saying from the jump that colonization in all its form at any time throughout history is violent and oppressive. There's no such thing as good colonization. So I want to make that clear before I start talking at length about the people who lived in these colonies. Secondly, I'm going to be talking a lot about local people affected by European colonization, but I want to reiterate that I'm not an expert. I'm not even an expert genealogist.
You're pretty good.
Yeah, but no one's ever certified me.
No, and they won't.
And they won't. So I'm going to do my best to advocate for the Indigenous people in this story. But as a non-Indigenous person myself, if there's research or information that's given by an Indigenous person or an organization that contradicts what I say, gotta ignore me. Just ignore me.
Just give her the coldest shoulder you've got.
The coldest one.
Just freeze it up.
And lastly, I would like to acknowledge that the mere fact that I'm able to know who my ancestors are in the 17th century is because I'm a descendant of colonizers. So the old saying is true. History is told by the victor, or in this case, the oppressor. And I want to acknowledge that here up at the front, that privilege is born of violence. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. And that I do, jokes out of the room for a second. I appreciate you saying that. I do think that's one of the things that I've found unrelatable about genealogy in the past is that it is not for everyone.
Exactly.
Literally because people's histories have been wiped out.
With that sobering preamble,
Yes.
Kim, you might think you know where in the world this story is going to begin, but I think it might actually surprise you.
I don't know anything.
Oh, that surprises me because you do know stuff.
Well, I certainly don't know much about history. As I have said before, I do not like it. I do not care about it.
Good. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah. So why don't you just catch me up?
Yeah. We are going to start our story in Brazil in the year 1636.
Good year.
With the birth of my 9th great-grandfather, Willem Hoffmeyer.
9th.
9th. That's a lot of generations.
That's so many greats.
You don't even need to visualize it. It's just so far.
It's so far.
So far back.
Yeah.
But before we really jump into 1636, I would love to set more of a scene for why we're in Brazil and how we got here.
Tell me.
It's like the record scratch. Like, I bet you're wondering how I ended up in Brazil. So I'm the first to admit I have one of the most run-of-the-mill predictable family trees for someone born in the northeastern United States. Yeah. It's like it follows almost exactly what that would look like. So when Brazil popped up, I was like, say what? It gave me pause. In fact, I was actually a little incredulous of it. I thought like somebody somewhere.
Yeah, surely no.
This is not correct.
They meant Brazil, Texas.
Yeah, Brazil, or Colorado.
Yeah, or Paris, England.
Paris, England,
Yeah.
Exactly. No. And to get it out of the way up top, I'm not Brazilian. I did know that.
Yes.
I am Dutch, which I learned from this story that there was a very brief moment in time where the Dutch colonized Brazil, which I did not know.
Neato.
So we're gonna learn something new today, I think.
Yeah.
But if you didn't know that the Dutch had colonized part of Brazil in the 17th century, you're not the only one. But bear with me as we do a little boring world history to set the scene.
Ugh.
I'm sorry, Kim. We just have to do a little bit. Just a little bit. So prior to like the late 16th century, 1500s, imperialism was mainly like a Spanish Portuguese party. No one else was really getting in on it.
Still pretty exclusive.
Yeah, it was an exclusive
Invite
club.
only.
Yeah, totally. But the Dutch were like, hey, I want in on that. Because it's really profitable to exploit other nations.
Yeah, to exploit an entire people.
Yeah, it is very profitable. And I don't want to delve too far into like European politics here.
Please don't.
It's so messy. The amount of like alliances and then wars with each other.
Oh yeah.
It's like a Bravo show.
It's high school.
It's high school.
It's high school.
It's wild.
You know that scene in Mean Girls where Regina George says, I love your bracelet. Where did you get it?
And
it's giving that.
It's
that. Giving Regina George.
I love that bracelet. Is it from Brazil? Because I will take it.
From Brazil.
So famously, we know that Portugal has been all up in Brazil's business since the year 1500.
That's a long time.
That's a long time to be all up in their business.
Yeah.
Throughout that time, they were stealing land, enslaving indigenous folks. They were on like the coastal region of Brazil, and they were occupying this land, which, to the best of my knowledge, belonged to a few different native tribes. But the ones that kept coming up for me were the Potiguara and the Tupinamba people. Of course, they expanded later to ruin other people's lives.
Of course.
During the 16th century, the Dutch hadn't really colonized places, so they were kind of setting themselves up to be that girl who traded with everyone.
Yep.
But then in Europe, the Netherlands and Portugal got into a war with each other. And the Dutch were like, okay, I guess Brazil's up for grabs.
Oh, yeah.
Which they did do. In 1624, the Dutch planted their first settlement in Brazil. And in 1630, they had successfully taken Brazil from Portugal. And they were looking to solidify their acquisition by bringing in Dutch colonists.
Whoa.
Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. It doesn't last long, which you'll find.
I was gonna say
it doesn't. Yeah.
Okay.
That's why we don't think of Brazil and Dutch people.
Yeah. They took all of Brazil at the time?
Well, so Brazil wasn't as big as you're thinking.
Yeah.
It's just that like small coastal region.
Okay.
So it's a much smaller area to take over.
Got it.
So as far as Dutch colonies went, Brazil was actually really unpopular with citizens. They did not want to go there. Because the only real way to earn wealth was to start a sugar plantation, which was cost prohibitive, like really cost prohibitive. So you already had to have wealth to set that up. And then there was all the fighting with Portugal, which there were still squabbles. Like the Portuguese didn't just like vacate Brazil. They're still around. So it wasn't a stable place to be. So it was mostly a colony of men of fighting age or the ultra wealthy who could afford to bring their families and start a plantation, which is why somewhat notable that my 9th great-grandfather, Willem Hoffmeyer, was born in 1636, just 6 years after they had taken over Brazil, and to have both of his parents living in that colony, including his mother. So
does that mean cha-ching, cha-ching?
I think. I don't have proof of it.
Okay.
But we're finally back to 1636.
Finally.
Let's see what else is going on in the world.
Just tell me.
We're coming up on the tail end of an 80-year war that had been going on between the Dutch and Spain. So the Dutch didn't just fight with the Portuguese. No. They were like, we're going to kick both their butts.
They're equal opportunity fighters.
Totally.
Yeah.
In North America, the colony at Providence, Rhode Island is first established by Roger Williams and Company.
Okay.
And 1636 was also the official start of the Qing dynasty in China, which was the last imperial dynasty in Chinese history. Isn't that interesting?
Big year.
A big year.
Big year.
Let's go back to Brazil.
Okay.
If I could.
Please.
Literally the only thing I know about Willem in Brazil is that he was born there. I don't even have records from there to technically prove it. There's just records from later that say that's where he was born. I would love to find those, but I don't know that they exist.
Yeah.
But from historical context, I think there's a few educated assumptions I can make. As I said, it was really cost prohibitive to have a whole family there. So Willem's mother, whose name is Geertruide, I know, fun name.
Yeah.
She would likely not have traveled to Brazil unless her husband had money and a way of supporting her and the family, which in this colony meant he was probably wealthy even back in the Netherlands. So I'm further bolstered by these assumptions by the name Hoffmeyer itself, which means estate supervisor.
Oh my goodness.
In Middle and High German. So I don't have the first name of Willem's father, so I can't find him either. It's difficult to verify, but I think we have enough little breadcrumbs to help us understand.
Okay.
I also couldn't find any records to say anything about Willem's father's death, but there, again, are later documents where Willem and Geertruide talk about it, and they say that he died in Brazil.
Got it.
And at that time, Geertruide took herself and her son away from the colony. I think Willem's probably around like 18 or 19 at this time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's been a while.
Yeah.
They leave Brazil to go to another Dutch colony, New Netherland.
Bum, bum, bum.
Why would they leave Brazil, though?
I mean, the internet is always saying come to Brazil, but they never talk about
why leave?
Go away from Brazil.
Go away from Brazil.
Yeah.
Well, they had to, because they leave in 1652 and the Portuguese take back Brazil in 1654.
So they said, too hot. Gotta go.
I think that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And I think it could stand to reason that this could be the reason that Willem's father died as well, is maybe like in fighting.
Oh.
So Geertruide leaves Brazil with Willem right before the Dutch totally lose Brazil, never to be had again, I think. This brings us to New Netherland. Yeah. Finally, we're in a place that makes sense.
Finally, something we can relate to.
This makes sense for my family tree. Everything falls into place.
Here's a quick question.
Yeah.
New Netherland is in Pennsylvania, is that what you said?
No, it's New York.
New York, okay. Mm-hmm. How long is the trip? Do you know, from Brazil to New York?
No idea.
Okay, I'm going to add that to my list.
Add that to your list of things to look up.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing I know for sure, I don't even know technically that they left Brazil in 1652.
Yeah.
I know for sure that they were in New Netherland in 1652. Okay. So it's possible they left the year before or something like that.
Okay.
So they show up in 1652 to New Netherland. And by that time, the Dutch had been there since 1613.
Okay.
So they've been there a while.
So it's a minute.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just like a quick recap of Dutch colonization in New York, they've been there for a while, and their relationship with the local tribes, specifically the Canarsie, Mohican, and Mohawk, also the Manhattans, it started off, according to Dutch records, which
sus,
take with a grain of salt.
Don't trust.
Was just a trade relationship, and it was like a pretty peaceful trade relationship. But as time went on, the Dutch consistently took advantage of local culture and customs to better their own situation in the region.
Shocker.
So one of the most popular ways to bolster your position in a colony and push a native population out is to bring in more settlers.
Sure.
Which they were not able to do in Brazil, which is probably why they lost Brazil. But unlike Brazil, with cost prohibitive plantations, New Netherland had lucrative fur trading, which required minimal cost to the individual to just get up and go and start killing animals.
Yeah.
So because of this, the Hudson Valley was growing and flourishing. And it makes sense that this is where Willem and Geertruide would end up to like restart their lives after Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Up until this point, like I said, I haven't had any conclusive records about Willem. Once he gets to New Netherland,
is he very popular once he gets there?
Him and his family are so often included in court records. It's wild.
He's an it girl of sorts.
In the worst way possible.
A legal it girl.
Exactly. Yeah. They are just out here doing the most.
Oh, no. So
Geertruide and Willem arrived to New Netherland in 1652. And we know that in 1652, Geertruide ends up remarried to another man named Joachim Wesselson.
Aha.
He goes by some other last names as well, like sometimes he's just called Joachim Wessels, sometimes spelled with an S and a Z at the end.
Sus.
And then Joachim Becker is the other one, or Joachim the Becker, because he was a baker.
Oh.
It sounds sweet, but it's not. He's not a sweet guy.
No, I assume not.
So I saw one source that said Joachim was originally from North Germany. I think he might be Dutch, but as I've mentioned, the military theater of the European continent is like popping off.
Yeah.
So borders are a squishy thing to pin down.
Borders are just a suggestion.
They're just a suggestion. So if he's Dutch or German, I'm not sure the distinction can be determined.
Yes.
Or is even important.
Yeah.
At the time that they come here, Joachim was a baker in a village called Beverwijk, which actually was founded in 1652. So it's possible that they all came together to move to the brand new town for this reason. And Beverwijk, where he resides, is a Dutch settlement that precedes modern day Albany. That's where that's located.
Okay. And that can you place Albany in the state of New York relative to tiers? I mean, Albany's like northern.
Yes, we don't, only the southern tier is a tier.
That's the only tier.
That's the only tier.
Okay, so it's not a cake.
It's not.
There's not multiple tiers.
That's so cute, though.
That would be so cute. The New York cake.
No, it's on the eastern border of New York, close-ish to the New England states that are adjacent to it.
Beautiful.
It's straight up north from the city, like
Great.
Manhattan, and about halfway up the state. And
I've heard of it.
They start to make a life there. And I do want to paint a little bit of a picture of Beverwijk because it's had such a unique personality in comparison to the other places around it.
Yeah.
It only had around like 100 or 200 families, which is not that many.
No.
And it was more remote than any other settlement in the area at the time. So they're on the frontier, quote, of New York.
Yeah.
Furthest away from any like Dutch colony that there was. And the primary source of income, like I said, was beaver pelts. And it's thought that that might be why it's called Beverwijk.
Yeah. So they're getting a little weird out on the frontier.
Exactly. So Beverwijk could literally mean beaver district.
I like thinking about it as a very beaver-centric place.
I think it was very beaver-centric.
I'm thrilled by that. Although...
Well, they were killing beavers.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's less
Never
of
mind.
like man and beaver creating like a society together.
Which is the real American dream.
Oh, God. Because of its remoteness, as you so astutely mentioned, it was kind of a wild place. Like a Wild West before the Wild West.
Oh, no.
And it also was kind of like a melting pot, which added to this. So New Netherland was mostly just made up of the Dutch colonists, but because everyone wanted to get in on the beaver business, it attracted people from other countries. So you actually had like French, English, and German folks hanging out in Beverwijk as well.
So it's less a melting pot and more a fondue with just multiple different white cheeses.
Sorry. Yeah. The assorted cracker collection, AKA my ancestry.
Okay. Thank you. I need a food analogy for it to really stick.
Yeah. You're absolutely correct. And so a really great example of these different like nations being represented here is that Willem gets married recently after he arrives, or shortly after he arrives. He marries a woman named Mary Tilton. So Tilton is a very English name.
Yeah.
And when they had children, they named their children both like very traditional English names and Dutch names. So for example, one was named Rebecca, who is my 8th great grandmother.
Sure.
And then like another, I can't even remember if this was a son or a daughter, but their name was Hieronymus.
Whoa. Now that's powerful.
It's a powerful name.
It's a powerful name.
So there was just like a mix of names in their children between like the Dutch and English heritage that they both had. So this is where I think a lot of that melting together of the cheese fondue happened.
Okay, cool.
And also being a remote town, the relationship between the settlers and the local indigenous folks was interacting all the time, as opposed to other colonies where it didn't happen quite as often. So the local nations were the Mohawk and the Mohican tribes, and they would actually come to Beverwijk almost every single day to trade, to buy things, and to bring up their interest to the local magistrate. So they would come to court and say like, this is what we're dealing with, and present it to them. And that would go up the ranks to like New Amsterdam, where the Dutch government was.
Got it.
And the only reason I'm mentioning this unique culture is because it was something I had to like pull apart for myself, because I think of U.S. colonies kind of all in the same way.
Oh, yeah.
Like the same flavor.
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't at all the case. I mean, for example, like Plymouth is going on at the same time, and they have this austere, like religiously centered settlement.
Yeah.
But the Dutch are pretty loose about religion in this colony. I mean, it really showed in the way that they comported themselves.
Yeah.
And then even within the Dutch colonies, there was differences because like in New Amsterdam and Manhattan, there were more aristocrats. So they had a very different like vibe there as opposed to Beverwyck was just like people getting weird about beaver pelts.
Just a bunch of like weird artisans really into fur.
That's exactly correct.
Now I have this is maybe an unnecessary question, but I grew up in Virginia.
Yeah.
So colonial Williamsburg and Jamestown and Yorktown were a huge part of my childhood.
Yeah.
Lots of field trips. Had no interest in it. Do you have a similar experience from being younger of being exposed to
like this type of history? This colonist history?
Like hands-on in a way?
Actually, no.
Hey.
Because this is all in like Albany and New York City.
Yep.
And I just don't think those places have as much like riding on that history in the same way that like this is all Williamsburg has.
Yes. That is, well, yes.
or like in Plymouth. That's kind of like their whole thing that they have.
Yeah.
Sorry if you guys have like a really thriving economy.
Never been.
Don't
know.
Don't know.
Not an expert.
Not
Don't
an
trust.
expert. But yeah, no, I don't think I even learned that much. I mean, I knew the Dutch were there, but I don't think I even learned that much about what was going on with them.
Okay.
In the same way that you would down here.
Yeah.
But that also could be because it traded hands. Like, the English just kept Virginia until we were like, get out of here.
Boy, did they.
And in New York, it changed hands from the Dutch to the English. That may be why we don't think about it in the same way. To further drive home what Beverwyck is like, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, there was a historian who wrote about it, and I'd love to read this quote by him. He said, quote, "The citizens of Beverwyck were slow to accustom themselves to disciplined living."
I've never related to something more. That's truly remarkable.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think it's dope.
That's awesome.
And this is very clearly demonstrated with the story of our babe Geertruide and her new husband Joachim. So from here onward, I'm going to talk a little bit about Geertruide and Joachim and their antics. And it's going to sound like a he said, she said, like Real Housewives kind of a story, which, come on.
I mean, look where they came from, the mean girls of Europe.
So Beverwyck actually had two bakeries at this time, the Wesselsons and a family called the Van Housens, who were Jans and Vulcan. And they were in direct competition with each other. And
I love a good feud.
Oh, it gets even better.
Oh, sorry. Have you seen the movie Little Italy?
No. Oh, is that the one with the pizza?
That's the one with the pizza, and it's an Italian family in Toronto feuding over their Italian pizza shops, or I don't know.
You're describing this.
It was an important reference for the pod.
It's an important reference because these are two bakeries in direct competition, and thankfully for us, they were actually neighbors right next to each other.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
It's like a sitcom where these two neighbors are just like feuding with each other and having competing interests.
I'm dying to know who is better.
You make your own decision. Actually, frankly, everything I've learned about them has almost nothing to do with the quality of their baking.
I mean, beggars can't be choosers in that time, I suppose.
I suppose not. Yeah, I mean, they're probably all pretty bland.
Yeah.
If I had to guess.
Yeah.
But the feuding shows itself in a lot of different ways. But one of the first instances is that Jan van Housen wants to take Joachim Wesselson to court for something. I don't think it actually says what it was for, but wants to take him to court. And once they hear about this, Geertruide walks to the neighbor's yard where Vulcan van Housen, the wife, is standing. Geertruide calls her a low woman and then punches her in the arm. And she has to go to court for punching her in the arm.
Yes, this is no joke. Okay, so this is personal story, and then I'll leave you alone and let you finish your thing. When I was in maybe third grade, I punched one of my currently still best friends in the stomach because I wore a skirt and didn't tell her, and she got mad at me about it. And I said, "There's no resolution here. I need to punch you." And then we went to mediation. It's literally the exact same.
That exact same thing. I feel like maybe I'm wrong here, but it sounds like historical courts were just like children's court.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, which is partially why I find history kind of silly. We haven't gotten better. What happened then is still happening now.
It's almost that's why I love it. It's just like, I'm reading the most silly stuff. And I feel like, this is my last tangent. I feel like so much of history is taught in this very like noble way.
Yeah.
And I love when I find crap like this, where it's just like
messy.
Where they just like punched each other in the arm and went to court for it.
Do you think it was a single punch and no retaliation and then they just parted ways?
I don't know. I mean, I only know that she punched her in the arm because she went to court for that. I don't know if the other woman went to court for something else. I didn't see it.
I'm so deeply invested.
Well, okay, so it gets better because Geertruide goes to court for this. And I think the court asked her to like rescind what she says about calling her a low woman.
Yeah.
And the court record says that instead of rescinding what she said, she repeats it, but with like more embellishment.
And then does she say no take backsies?
No, but she says it like with more embellishment. And then it says she looks at every jury like in the eye and threatens them if they try any nonsense with her.
Wow. So this is a total badass.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see some later stuff where she can be more than one thing.
I feel very forgiving of unhinged women at this point in time.
Yeah. But after she threatened the jury, they fined her 6 guilders.
That's what, like $400?
I didn't actually calculate this one, and it's a little complicated to calculate. And if I may say here as a caveat, every time I talk about guilders, it is so loose, the amount that it's worth.
Very loose.
Very loose.
Incredibly loose.
This is only the beginning of the Great Beverwyck baking feud. It's only just begun, and it involves all family members. Apparently, Jan van Housen's daughter was doing domestic work at Joachim and Geertruide's house. So, I mean, I think this goes to show just like, even in conflict, like there's not that many families.
Yeah.
So everyone's interconnected.
Yeah.
She was doing domestic work at their house. And there are 2 separate instances. First, where I think Joachim kicks her, and then a second incident where Geertruide kicks her.
No.
And Jan van Housen takes them both to court. So I'm going to have you read both instances, Kim, if you would.
Why are we kicking children?
I don't know.
All right. Jan van Hoesem, plaintiff, against Joachim Wesselson, Baker, defendant. The plaintiff complains that The plaintiff complains that the defendant kicked his daughter in the chest so that she is unable to do any work. The defendant says that his daughter, being in his service, was admonished by his wife to mend her ways as she was a young maiden, whereupon, she making some retort, the woman was moved to chastise her and kicked the plaintiff's daughter with her foot in the rump.
In the rump.
In the rump. Well, first,
it's a translation. This is, of course, a translation.
Okay, all right. So dad is saying you kicked my daughter in the chest, and then wife is saying no, I kicked her in the butt.
Yes. And then there's a separate instance.
Jan van Hoesem, plaintiff, against Geertruide Hieronymus.
Oh yeah, that's her maiden name.
Defendant. The plaintiff complains that the defendant kicked his daughter, who was in her service, from behind when she stooped over, so that she discharged much blood, contrary to nature. What? Okay. Whew.
So actually, this could actually be now that I'm thinking about it, could be the same instance. When you say it out loud, I don't think I contemplated that option. So it might not be separate instances. It might be like Jan van Housen took Joachim to court, and then Joachim was like, not me, my wife did it.
Yeah.
And then he took his wife to court. That actually makes more sense now that you're saying it out loud.
Although he is adding this whole bit about blood, which is
different from the first one.
That is horrifying.
Yeah, it's awful. So,
contrary to nature is something that really does not sit well with me.
I know. Next time you go to the doctor, be like, this thing is happening contrary to nature.
Contrary to nature. That's horrible.
It's horrible. So this goes back and forth. Not everything is so inflammatory as this. We know that at one point, Jan van Housen throws hot ashes on Geertruide and Joachim's house. It did not start a fire, but that was the intention.
Wow.
And it just like they constantly are taking each other to court over how to be the best baker, the only baker in town.
Wow.
And this all kind of comes to a head when Joachim decides he was going to take matters in his own hand to dissuade customers from going to Jan van Housen's bake shop. And he builds a whole pigsty in front of the door of Jan van Housen's bake shop, which is from the intro. Yes. So the court immediately says, like, you have to take down the pigsty. And they tell him a few times until finally they're like, you have 3 days to take this down. And Joachim here's the the conviction, I guess. Here's the conviction, walks home, gets his sword, and then walks back into court, waves it around, and yells at the magistrate to fight him like a man.
This is the 1600s version of Teresa Giudice flipping the table.
What is that reference?
It's a Real Housewives reference.
Oh, I need to watch more Real Housewives.
No, you don't. No, you super don't. I bet it was kind of beautiful.
In its own way.
Yeah, a little artistic.
A little power to the people kind of a moment. But I wish it wasn't Joachim.
No.
Because he's a bad man.
He's a bad man.
So the court is so incensed by Joachim's behavior that they take this matter all the way to Manhattan, which in New Amsterdam is the center of the Dutch government of New Netherland. So they're like, hey, we've got this guy and it's a real problem.
Well, wait, so what happens when he goes into court with the sword? Does he just leave afterwards?
I have no idea. I just have the record that he did it. And he shows up later to answer for showing up to court with his sword.
Okay.
But I have no idea how it ended. Nobody says.
Maybe he got tired.
Yeah, he's like, I'm too sleepy.
Too sleepy, I gotta go.
Yeah, presumably he just drops it and that's that.
Okay. Well,
because it doesn't mention anyone dying either, so I don't think anyone got injured.
Okay.
But yeah, they send it down to Manhattan and are like, listen, we need a bigger court than us to take care of this pigsty situation. Mm-hmm. And Joachim actually never takes down the pigsty, and the court in Manhattan fines him 100 guilders for all of the wrongdoings, and that he must immediately take down the pigsty. And I gotta be honest, Kim, I don't know that he does. Nowhere do I read that and now he took down the pigsty. So
yeah,
I guess if he doesn't go back to court, maybe he did, but it's never explicitly stated that the pigsty gets taken down. So that sentence marks the end of that whole mess. Things settle down, fewer incidents.
Oh man.
Yeah, I think as far as I know, they just ended up with 2 bakers in Beveerwyck.
Season 2, there's a writer's strike. Exactly. It's really unexciting.
Let's never forget the baking feud of Beveerwyck.
I could
always
never
remember.
That's incredible.
So Joachim may have knocked it off with his next door neighbor, but he shows up in court so much over the next few years.
Oh boy.
For this thing, one thing and another. He gets taken back to court. Here's the list. Unsettling chickens. That's my favorite one. Those are real things.
Unsettling chickens.
The neighbor was so mad.
Oh, that's straight out of, I have a lot of references today. It's very Legend of Zelda.
He unsettles the chickens.
Yeah, he makes the cuckoos very angry.
Very angry. The next one is actually very sad. He beats an old man.
Oh my God.
He shoots a dog.
Jail. I hate this person.
Yeah, and the last one is he slaps a woman.
Oh.
Yeah.
This guy's got issues.
Not a good person. And Geertrude doesn't sound super great.
Yeah, they're
as well.
well matched, I suppose.
Well matched.
Ugh. Willem is just around.
I'm so glad you brought it up because I'm going to come back to him right now.
Okay, great.
He's not quite as wild.
No.
He does show up in court a lot, but it usually has to do with he owes someone money. But there isn't any violence or anything like that I see. But his troubles do start later, and that's in 1655.
Okay.
Is when they start. No, that's a lie. 1656.
Okay.
Is when they start.
There's a big difference between the two.
Yes. The reason I mentioned 1655 is because he wouldn't have troubles if 1655 didn't exist.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Follow my logic.
Yeah, I'm here with you.
1655 in Manhattan, New Amsterdam is beginning to have more of a direct conflict with one of the local nations, the Manhattans. And this is different from just tensions that they've had in the past. There's an actual conflict going on now. And since New Amsterdam was the center of government for all of New Netherland, they make this mandate that no Dutch settlement can continue trading with any native person, no matter what nation they're from.
Okay.
They just blanket statement, you cannot do it. This is a huge problem for Beveerwyck. That's untenable. Their entire economy is based on this relationship that they have with the Mohicans and Mohawks.
Oh, no.
So since it's a beaver pelt town, they need permission from local people to hunt on the land, and they need to be able to trade with them because there are local hunters who will trade their beaver pelts. Like this, it's very much surrounding that.
Yeah.
That being said, I think Beverwyck played pretty fast and loose with mandates coming up the Hudson River from New Amsterdam. They're so remote. They could probably just get away with like ignoring it. In fact, I think they frequently did.
Yeah.
They run their businesses like normal, but when large amounts of money were involved, that's where people get into trouble. For Willem, he got in trouble in 1656. A year after the mandate to cease trading went out, he takes a large batch of beer up the Hudson River and he sells it to native people. It was such a grievous crime, apparently, that Willem was fined 500 guilders.
Oh, my God.
That's about $45,000 in today's money. It's a lot of money.
What are we doing?
What are we doing?
What are we doing here?
But the fine wasn't enough in this case. The court also banishes him from the country for 3 years.
Oh, where's he going to go?
Well, he never left.
You know what? I like his moxie.
Yeah.
I'm here for it.
I know he never left is because he appears in more court records the next year.
Oh, you silly boy.
He just stuck around. In 1657, the court record that he appears in is actually due to his father, stepfather. Don't want to get that confused.
No.
Yeah, Willem's stepfather and famed villain baker of Bavaria.
But you know what? The step apple does not fall far from the tree.
No, certainly not. These things never do. Joachim sues Willem to take Willem's house away from him because Joachim says, I lent him that house and I want it back now. And Willem says, you gave it to me as a wedding gift, so it's mine. But basically, in this situation, I can't, as with a lot of genealogy, I can't declare intent. You can hardly ever get like records declaring intent.
I know, but I care about it so much.
Yeah, I mean, me too. But I think we know enough about Joachim to say that I think it's pretty likely that he wanted to take advantage of Willem's bad situation to advantage himself. I mean, he shot dogs, he hit women.
Oh.
So while I can't prove it, I think it's pretty safe to assume that Joachim was doing this pretty maliciously.
Does he meet like a really grisly end to his life? Oh, it's not fair.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, you're going to be mad. But I mean, that's history, baby. So getting his house taken wasn't the only problem Willem experienced at this time.
Sure.
He was written into court records time and time again, not just by Joachim, but other residents of Beverwyck would take him to court for debts owed. He owed a lot of money and beaver pelts.
Yeah.
So he was just taken to court for debts on debts on debts.
That's on debts.
And a lot of the time, for what I can tell, Willem actually just didn't show up.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
Why would you?
No, can't be fussed.
But I mean, technically he was supposed to be banished, so maybe that's why.
Yeah.
But there is one court session where Willem had defaulted on his loan so much that the court declared that if his debts weren't paid, he would be executed.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go. I mean, I don't find a record of Willem paying his debts, and I don't find a record of Willem being executed. So I don't know for sure how this went down.
Probably just quietly.
Probably. That's
you think
so
people just
true.
forgot?
Maybe, or maybe no one was like actually following through with any of it. So, I mean, he might have paid it. It might have just been an empty threat.
Yeah.
A lot of those going around. But either way, he does not die at this time. The suing does go both ways. Willem sues Joachim at a certain point for money owed. Apparently, one of Willem's jobs was to read scripture in church on Sunday morning. And I guess you get paid for that in 17th century colonies.
I mean, the jobs are few and far between.
I know.
So you got to make them somewhere.
Willem never got paid for that job, which I guess was Joachim's responsibility. And Joachim said he didn't get paid because he didn't do the job. Willem was always drunk from the night before, so he never came to the church to actually read the scripture.
So do you think that he was drunk enough that he thought that maybe he was reading scripture at home while
privately.
He was drunk? Yeah, and he was like, I did the job.
Yeah,
just didn't do it where you told me to
myself.
Yeah.
No, Willem says that his excuse for not reading was that Joachim would steal the church key from him and hide it.
This is incredible. These sorts of, when we get into shooting dogs, then I bow out. But these sorts of harmless pranks of hiding keys, I live for. So that he
doesn't have to like pay for his job, I guess.
Incredible.
So crazy.
It's wild.
And it does make me want to know more. I can't know more, but like, why was he hiding it? And what was Willem getting drunk for?
There's more to this.
There's so much more to it.
I'm dying to know.
I would love to know.
We should hold a seance.
And ask Willem ourselves.
Yeah.
I don't really want to call Yoakum.
No, that's true. or Gertrude.
Yeah. Maybe Mary Tilton was okay.
Yeah, she probably was just sitting there going like, oh, this is I want nothing to do with this.
And that actually brings me to my next point.
Oh, no.
Which is that in 1667, after years of like all of this legal action being taken back and forth with Willem, Mary separates from Willem.
Go off, queen.
And the court grants her divorce.
Wow.
This is 1667. Isn't that wild?
They're like, no, we know what you're dealing with. We'll give you this
girl,
one.
We know.
Wow.
I can't speculate too wildly about why they granted the divorce, but I think there's a few like historical clues that can help us, and we can speculate responsibly. So for one, what little I know about 17th century Dutch colonial law, there was a precedence for separation and divorce. It wasn't often, but it did happen. It wasn't a total anomaly. So generally, the Dutch courts would only grant divorce in extreme cases. And to them, extreme meant adultery or cruelty. But then in some other cases, less likely, were excessive debt or inebriation could be considered.
Porque no los dos.
Exactly.
It's probably all of those things based on
yes.
These people.
Based on, we know the family was feral.
Yeah.
So extreme cruelty does not surprise me.
No.
But the only thing that we have evidence of in Willem's case is that he was decidedly in debt. Even if that was the only reason, like we have evidence for that. And Mary dips.
Good.
She dips. So they separate. The court orders them to sell their house and split the money. And then they separate the children. So Willem takes the oldest three and Mary takes the youngest three.
That's
a wild choice.
Complicated.
Mary does remarry. Remarry. That's good. She remarries. And there's no record of Willem remarrying, which I think is maybe for the best.
Yeah.
Like, go date yourself, Willem.
I'm sure he tried to date all of Beavertown. Uh-oh. There is no way that he was not cheating.
No way.
So he's probably messing around all over the place.
I think that just goes without saying for like any man of this time.
Yeah, any man that we talk about on this pod.
Just assume. Mm-hmm. Just assume it. So at this point, we are nearing the end of our story, but I don't have like a narratively satisfying way to tie all of this up. The satisfying way would be that Yoakum comes to a gruesome end.
Yes.
I cannot give you that.
Ugh.
The only thing I can tell you is that the family sort of just fades into the obscurity of respectability. And to be clear, this respectability was not earned. The family got it through marriage. One of Yoakum's daughters, actually it was Yoakum and Gertrude's daughter, they marry a magistrate, like a pretty powerful magistrate.
One of the ones that he threatened with a sword?
Not the same one, but I wouldn't be surprised if like they were there.
Oh, yeah.
If they were there for it. And the advantageous marriage puts the family like in this position. For example, there is another time when Gertrude gets dragged to court after this marriage happens, and she was accused by neighbors of being a loose woman. But the court, which was presided by her new son-in-law, deems her not guilty, and she's cleared of all charges against her character, and she goes free. So, I mean, in this case, that's great. Let's not take women to court for being loose.
But also crooked.
It's complicated. Things have layers.
Oh,
things have
gross.
Layers. It is gross. And we also know that Yoakum and Willem appear in the next like decades of history on important deed transactions. They're witnesses on wills, which also validates their place as like respectable citizens in this town. And somewhere in between all of that, England takes over New Netherland from the Dutch. Beverwijk becomes Albany. And this family is actually like one of the oldest families of the town in a well-known city now. And they kind of are just like cementing their place as like one of the old families of Albany in the way that we talk about old families in America, which I think most people are familiar with, like that rhetoric.
Yeah.
That's how people generally talked about them afterwards. So I think it's like pretty crazy to look at just how messy and wild this family was, and then to see that they just sort of like fade into the background.
That is wild. Why would you let your son marry the daughter of people like that?
I mean, what kind of stuff was he up to, though? You know what I mean? Like, they probably were all up to some business.
Yeah, I think everyone is just horrible.
So to tie it up, in 1680, Joachim dies of old age.
It's not fair.
In 1681, Gertrude does the same.
I hope they both had stomach aches for their entire lives after all of this.
They should. And then in 1689, which is actually a little young, Willem dies. And all that remains of this wild family is the trail of court records as they barreled their way haphazardly through the New York frontier. So that's my story of my crazy Dutch colonial ancestors. Kim, this is my favorite part of the show.
Yeah.
Where you tell us if you found any resonance with the story I've told you today.
Well, I too love to kick children in the chest.
Yeah, kick children and shoot dogs specifically.
Oh, it makes me so mad. And the notion of like old families sort of being instated this way, like to me, it feels like every old family or every lineage that maintains power over time probably got it by doing stuff like this.
Yeah.
And that makes me furious.
It's not great.
It's not great. And it's also, it hasn't changed. It's the same. I am not going to do the math, but a lot of years later.
And yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, this is why I think, or like the way that I like to do genealogy is to read these things and to not want that sort of thing to repeat itself.
Sure. Theoretically, yes. Or the people who are descendants of these people who might have power currently are going to be like, that's sick. I'm going to do the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I think you might be right, but I'd like to remind you, I'm a descendant of these people. And
well, that's true.
What I love is that you do not need to be defined by the actions that have taken place before you. Mm-hmm. But you do need to look at them in their face and decide what kind of an ancestor you want to be.
Let me challenge something real quick.
Okay.
You would not have shot a dog regardless of knowing the story or not.
Yeah.
This is where it all comes out that's like patently not true. And you're like, no, I would have.
I mean, the things that I learned from this are the intricacies and violent intricacies of colonialism in a way that I wouldn't have before this story.
Right.
I learned the ins and outs of that. I learned the ins and outs of how easy it is for bad behavior to get smoothed over with just time.
Yeah.
And I don't think those things are unhelpful when moving forward in life.
Yeah. We're at a place where that is very helpful and also very clear to me anyway.
But you're right. I wouldn't have shot dogs. I might have unsettled chickens.
Thank you for saying it on the record. And I think we all have unsettled a chicken or two in our day.
Yeah. There is another reason that I like this story, and it's related in the way that we're thinking about like how things still act the same way in a system that was created so many years ago. But this like global stage on which like Western imperial European countries are acting, it feels so far removed. Like when I went through these classes of like Western civilization, Western history or whatever, I didn't really like connect with it in any way. And to see how my family and how many families like mine have a through line of that history.
Sure.
I think it's wild. I think it's wild that ripples in time through history until we sit here and unsettle chickens.
And on that note,
that's it. That's it. That's our story. It's not a great ending. Let's pretend Joachim got tarred and feathered.
I'm always going to be looking for poetic justice.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of it to give you.
No, I figured. I figured that's the case. We'll make our own.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay, bye.
Low Ancestry is written and produced by Karen Harding and co-hosted by me, Kim McMasters, with original music and audio engineering by Benjamin Malk. Original cover art was designed by Christina Swanson of Swan Song Creative. Resources pertaining to today's episode and a link to the official bibliography can be found in our show notes or at our website, lowancestry.com. All research was conducted by Karen, but she's been known to be wrong on occasion. So if you'd like to connect with Karen or even send her a correction, you can email us at connect@lowancestry.com or find us on Instagram @lowancestry. Genealogy is, after all, a community effort. Thank you so much for listening, and if you like what you hear, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you, and frankly, we really need this.